Hi, everyone. Greetings from Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm here today to talk a lot about sort of these themes that have been emerging through this sort of panel put together. And I'm really going to lean into that diversity sort of aspect of the conference. We'll just go ahead and get started. The way I thought we could structure sort of this talk is to give a brief background on insight, incubation, in case you haven't heard enough of it, brief overview of the study I'm going to talk about. There's really two studies, it's really one. Highlight some findings, not go really nitty gritty into the details, and really just sort of end with some discussions and ideas moving forward. And so in crafting this talk, I really want you to think about this more of an ideas talk and less of a research talk. But again, if you want those details, find me later. I will talk your ear off. I'll send you all my slides. I have a lot going on, but for now, I'm just going to sort of highlight and go through and really talk about some of these ideas. So insight moments can represent very powerful moments of understanding in mathematics. And so as a math educator, person who's interested in mathematics, insight moments are very special for a lot of reasons. So here's an example. My friend's a photographer. She happened to capture the moment her son, Owen, finally realized why it is that when you add 0 to a number, the number doesn't change, right? And so these insight moments are very special to us. They tend to represent the finding of remote connections in mathematics, improved understanding of concepts, right? Finally understanding sort of what the p-value is or whatever it is you have going on, finally understanding. It's also sort of this payoff for struggling, right? Like you could feel like you're working on a problem, not getting anywhere, and then have that aha moment. And then lastly, some research, sadly, suggests that these insight moments might be the only positive experiences that students have in math classrooms. So they're of great interest to us, and they really align with educator goals. So as educators, we want students to make connections. This is central to their development of expertise and expert knowledge. We want them to understand concepts. We want them to be persistent, even if they feel like they're not getting anywhere. We want them to sort of engage in that failure, that struggle, those desirable difficulties, and get comfortable being uncomfortable. And also, hopefully, they enjoy learning. So one question I'm often asking myself is, how do we get students to have these insight moments? Now, one option here is known as incubation. And the general idea looks something like this. First, you bring students to work on a problem, and they have this deep immersive period, right? This is the struggle period that was just talked about, where you're trying to find a way to solve it. You can't, you try something else. And through this process, you're sort of developing a mental representation of the problem, right? You're sort of better understanding the ins and outs and the parameters of what you have to work with. But oftentimes that really doesn't pay off immediately, and you reach that impasse. And then upon reaching that impasse, right, we throw our computers out the window and take our dogs for a walk, right? We take a shower, we go for a walk. We do lots of things that are sort of lightly cognitively demanding, but we're not really thinking about the problem. And then during that incubation period, or upon return to the problem, we have this moment of insight where all of a sudden it looks different, or the solution staring us in the face. But one challenge of sort of understanding these incubation periods and what they look like and how they can be used is that incubation is really, really hard to study in the lab as it happens in our natural everyday environments, right? Incubation, walking dogs, taking a bath, driving a car, very common occurrences of rest and sort of consciously moving away from problems. It's very, very hard to do this in the lab in a way that is sort of ecologically valid. So one way to sort of get around this is to just capture incubation as it happens outside the lab, right? Work your way backwards. See how people are solving or having these insight moments, working backwards to figure out sort of the commonalities that may lead us to maybe helping them have those insight moments. So the study overview across two studies, the first one's the original study, the study 2 is a replication I did. Overall brought in 488 undergraduates into the lab, and I gave them a math puzzle. They were thrilled. That's sarcasm. This is the math puzzle I gave them. So their instructions are, using the 4 digits and 2 symbols below, see if you can create a balanced equation. So your digits are 2, 3, 4, and 5. You have a plus, the additional symbol, and then you have the equal sign. And the rules to this problem are you have to use each digit and symbol once and only once. You cannot add any digits or symbols, and you can try out any mathematical procedure or methods on the numbers to make a balanced equation. Now, the way to think about this, because you're all trying to solve it right now, is to think of them as magnets on a board that you have to move around to create a balanced equation. Now, if this talk was longer, I'd let you incubate on it and not listen to what I'm saying and try and solve it on your own, but we're going to move through this. So generally, what we tend to find is that students try and use the combination of numbers to make a true and balanced equation, but very quickly realize that if you put the largest numbers as additions on one side and the smallest to create a larger number on the other, it just doesn't work. The answer to the solution is to think beyond addition. It's to think sort of beyond this immediate concept of using division to solve the problem, and really to think of exponents. So using that notation to sort of move the two, not from sort of like an addition, but to an exponent. And by the way, we had some divergent thinkers who decided to use the addition symbol as an X and create an algebraic expression. There are about 4 of them. They are included in our sort of numbers for who solved. So this is the solution. And in case you're dying to know what happens if the students thought that the caret symbol was involved in this and that they would violate the rules if they solve this. A great example of prior knowledge that can actually make it harder to solve, but there were only 12 of them and they're omitted from all analysis. So we were able to sort of control for that. Okay, so they were given 6 minutes to solve this in the lab. If they solved, we said, thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful day. If they didn't solve, we entered them into phase 2. We sent them out into the wild, and it looked something like this. So we said, go live your life as normal. And if you happen to think of the solution to the problem, here's an email. It's going to live in your email box, and there's a link to a survey. If you happen to have that aha moment, go ahead, open it up, keep it handy and fill out everything, all these questions about what your experience was like. But if it's been 3 days and you haven't solved it, we'll go ahead and follow up with you. So across these 2 studies, again, brought in 488 students, 28% of them were able to solve in the lab, which left 331 who completed the wild phase. Now, this doesn't include everyone, right? Some people we lost in the wild, some reported cheating. There's a couple other reasons that this end sort of filters down, but this is a pretty nice sample size. And of those students, 157, so exactly 50% were able to solve the problem. So I'm going to focus on their experiences. And so we asked them, what were you doing when the solution came to you? There were lots of different things. People were dancing in their apartments, they were driving, they were zoning out during class. Some person said, I was watching Don Lemon. I don't know why they decided to share that information, to that detail, but there's just a lot sort of happening here. But what I really want to focus on is one notable case from sort of this first study. So this student reported that they were doing their my homework for English 4W, and the main topics for this class are form and power. That's when it hit me that taking the power of a number doesn't require another symbol, and I smacked myself in the face. I immediately was like, what is happening? If you were there in the lab that day, just me by myself, I did a double take. And the reason for this is, we know there's lots of mechanisms of incubation, right? These rest periods, there's sort of a lot going on. So you have things like the inhibition of fixating cues. So over time, right, if you failed really hard and that failure is fresh in your mind, that incubation break might help to sort of inhibit falsating cues. You also have evidence of broadening of semantic activation. So over time, right, more and more remote ideas might sort of become more easily available to you, allowing you to sort of make the connection to exponents. But there's a couple other things, but there's also this one really weird theory that came out in the early 90s called opportunistic assimilation. And I'm going to talk about that really quickly. So this theory basically posits that immersion and failure during that struggle period create what they call failure indices, or memory traces that are in long-term memory. And what happens is the problem solvers will, struggle, fail, and then they go into that incubation phase where they go into the diversity of everyday life. And what happens is those failure indices will sensitize them to hints in the environment that will help them to solve, whether you're consciously aware of it or unconsciously. So generally, this idea is that going through struggle will help you sort of map on hints in the wild, and that can help you sort of create these aha moments. The problem with this is there's so much past research showing that people are terrible at picking up hints, right? We just sort of talked about this. Unless you tell them, hey, there might be something in your environment that's really helpful, they're not really going to transfer that. They're not really going to see connections. A lot of times it's very superficial. So we have a lot of these papers that have come out that are just showing that, hey, this probably isn't real. This isn't really working. But what's interesting is that this theory requires a lot to be tested. It requires full immersion and impasse to create failure indices. It requires diversity of hints in everyday life. It requires actual rest periods that are really hard to recreate in the lab, and there's no time limits. So if you're thinking about something like mathematics, where people can spend days, weeks, months, years thinking about a problem, that's like almost impossible to reproduce in the lab. And I think that makes it really frustrating, right? We want our theories to be falsifiable, but to not be able to sort of recreate them in controlled settings really limits their usability. And I will note here, if you've ever encountered this theory, they originally said that hints are solely responsible for aha moments. You can never have an aha moment without something in your environment helping. I like to think we've moved away from that a little bit as the one big theory to explain it all. So I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking more about how people sort of can incorporate hints. And so if opportunistic assimilation is at work, some students might be sort of aware of hints and report them, right? If we can't falsify it in the lab, then it should be appearing in everyday life. And so that second study, I explicitly asked students, was there a hint in your environment that helped you solve? In fact, we told students before they left the lab, hey, just be aware of your environment, anything that could be helpful, like take a mental note of what's going on and then open that survey. Self-report, right? It's not going to be perfect, but we did try. And when we asked them this, 24% of the students who solved said, yeah, there was a hint in my environment. And I really want to talk to you about two hints of interest here. One is a student who said, I went outside and sat on the benches, I listened to music, and I stared at the tour group where my attention was caught when the tour guide pointed at the Kenzie Pavilion, right? This is a building at UCLA. I looked up and realized the equation written on the mural. So this, I tried to enlarge it as much as possible, is E equals MC squared. So this is an example of this freak incident where a student went outside and literally saw the solution in the wild. Talk about why that's important in just a sec. The second one is someone said, I was watching PewDiePie play a 12-hour Minecraft stream. I went to heat up some ramen, and as I was eating, my boyfriend called. I told him about the study, and I started staring at this corner of my desk. Then I thought about Pythagorean theorem and wrote down the 4 digits and 2 symbols to solve it. Now, if you take these together, these 3 hints I sort of briefly previewed, they're very different in nature. You have one, the word power, which is semantically related to the idea of taking the power of something or a number. You have the spatial, perceptual, visual field of a desk that linked to Pythagorean theorem that linked back to this. And then you have the case where this solution actually existed in the wild as is. So this really made me question, is math special? Is there something about mathematics that is like really like lending itself well to this theory? And there could be a couple of reasons why, yeah, maybe. One is that math is found in the wild on college campuses, right? We as researchers often rely on our undergraduate populations. And so since the college student traditionally is on campus, lives on campus, is walking between buildings, they're probably more likely to experience mathematics or other sort of related hints in the wild as it stands. So if we think about maybe trying to pair more of our tasks, our insight work to the everyday life experiences of our samples, of our participants, maybe we would see sort of more support for this. The other reason is students have a lot of prior knowledge at the college level of mathematics, right? One of the things we see across educational development is students become better experts. They have more flexible, integrated semantic networks. They are able to make connections compared to maybe other tasks where they don't have as much prior knowledge. And perhaps that sort of wider net will allow them to be greater sensitive to things that could help them, such as the corner of a desk and Pythagorean's theorem. So perhaps this prior knowledge might play a role in how well someone can pick up a hint. And so in summary, students solved in a diverse amount of ways. They benefited from a diverse sort of variety of hints, And math and other fields may be of interest to us moving forward to see how things like prior knowledge, anxiety, other things that students already sort of developed or other participants have developed really map onto their experiences of insight in that particular field. And so I'd like to end just with some exciting steps forward, things that I get really excited about thinking, sort of the future of insight research. One is research into the diverse environments of everyday life. I think in the last 5 years, we've really seen researchers sort of leave the lab or bridge the lab or do lots of really cool stuff in the lab and try and see how that looks outside the lab. To me, this is very exciting. I love the chaos of everyday life. And so I think we'll get maybe a better, well-rounded picture when we start to incorporate this more. The second thing is I think we really need to think more about immersion and prior knowledge. So sort of going back to that last talk, failure, right? Thinking about that deep struggle period is an important part. If we can't control the hints that students need, right? If everyone gets a different type of hint that's the best for them, and we can't really control that, maybe what we could put our effort into is building better immersion periods, right? We can control what we do in the classroom so that when we release students, maybe they're better off assimilating or whatever it is to have that aha moment. Third, I really would like us to start diversifying the tasks that we use in incubation and insight. This is not to say that laboratory classical insight problems aren't helpful. They totally are. But when we sort of diversify our tasks, we can find these nuances, maybe these unique aspects of problem solving or commonalities among all of them that will help us sort of like bridge this work. And then lastly, I'm just excited at the possibility of really embracing sort of the interweaving of mechanisms. If you read the research from the 90s coming forward, it's much less about, this is the theory that's going to prove insight and this, no, it's this one, right? I think you have a lot happening. I think we recognize that now, right? Inhibition of falsating information, semantic spreading, maybe cues in the environment. There's a lot happening. So figuring out when and where that's working, I think would be really exciting. So this is a final slide. Insight researchers, give wild hints a chance because you never know, and we're in the environment, you might sort of see that insight and aha moment. And here's a picture of the target aisle I was at last week. So thank you very much.
Thank you.